There we go. So we'll start with sort of some things that we can do on a very practical basis, stop for some discussion, ideas back and forth. And then the second half is going to be some things that we can do more at a higher level and some things that are going on at city level or national level, and just look at what our impact can be on that area. So again, appreciate you joining us today. We'll start with a short prayer. Jesus, help us to follow you in our warming world. Help us to be more like you in what we say and do, and reflect your heart for our planet and our neighbors who inhabit it. Let us not overlook the signs of distress around us, from summer heat waves to splitting animals. And let us not so easily get dismayed. May we put our hope in you and root our actions in that hope. In Jesus' name, amen. And I would just pause for a sec to say that, you know, I keep reading about climate anxiety and climate distress and all of that. And we're going to start out with some things today that are a bit distressful. But I am so optimistic and so hopeful about the things that are happening and the things that we can do, that optimism and that hope is really what I hope to focus on today. So to start us out, you know, global temperatures are rising, and I think many of us have either been experiencing that or reading about it. You know, temperatures are rising globally. Seattle hit 108 degrees in 2021. I still cannot believe that. But, you know, the past week or so, when it's been 90 something, I was at the Bloomberg Green Festival this week, and it's like people were coming into Seattle and saying, this is not really Seattle weather. It's just gotten so warm. You know, so 2021 was the highest, but you get times like this. When I was growing up in Seattle, if it got into the 80s, it was absolutely amazing, and now it's like 90 plus 100 plus is hot. But you know, we're not so bad compared to some other places. If you look at it in New Delhi or other parts of South Asia, it got up over 50 degrees Celsius, so 120 something degrees, and literally people were heat stressed, to put it mildly, and having significant problems. Phoenix hit 110 degrees on 54 days last year, and it's already up at very high temperatures. So around the world, there have been significant heat increases. If we look at, you know, this week, we've got Texas after the Beryl went through, and you've got some areas without air conditioning. And, you know, a significant number of people are either going to the emergency room. Some of them are unfortunately dying of the heat. And a lot of this is caused by greenhouse gases from the fossil fuels and agriculture, and fossil fuels are really a couple of the key causes on it. So what happens when the heat's extreme? When the air reaches temperatures above body temperatures, and it's been pretty close in Seattle this week, more heat flows into the body than flows out, which can cause a variety of heat-related problems. The vulnerable people are at particular risk. That can be the elderly. It can be people with particular diseases. And so there are significant problems when the heat goes so high. And you know what we don't think of it as much is that heat kills more Americans than any other weather event, including tornadoes and flooding. So we hear about floods, and we hear about tornadoes, and we hear about hurricanes, and X number of people died. I mean, it's literally thousands of people in the US are dying from heat, and many thousands of people are dying overseas of heat. You know, the pilgrimage to Mecca for the Muslims was the last month before. Over 1,000 people died because it was too hot. So causes significant problems. And however, those heat-related problems and deaths are preventable through outreach and intervention. And so there is opportunity. And what we're going to be looking at today is some of the opportunities for prevention in particular. What's interesting to look at also is just sort of the personal impact on it. I love the quote from Axios News: heat days are the new snow days. My wife's a teacher. And so like, how many snow days did you have? Well, not really. But in other parts of the country, you've now got heat days. It's too hot to go to school. And I spend a lot of the year in Singapore, and Singapore's okay, but other parts of Asia, Philippines have closed down schools because it's too hot. They don't have air conditioning in the schools. Worcester, Massachusetts, ended the school year early because buildings don't have air conditioning and it's too hot. Camps during the summer are changing their activities. It's also impacting us on prices because with floods and drought that are partly caused by the heat, olive oil prices are going up, cocoa's going up. If you like chocolate, it's a bit of a challenge these days. And then there's less water in the Panama Canal, which raises costs. So the heat, the other climate impacts are causing significant issues around the world. Now, I look at sort of the biblical references on any subject we're talking about. And the heat extremes of today are not really directly in the Bible. And they're not things that, what we're talking about with incredible heat and deaths is not really part of what's there. But as I look for areas around heat, I said, no, there are several things, and there are lots of references to heat in the Bible. So you go to Matthew. Landowner went out in the morning, hired workers, and they hired them at various times during the day. And the workers complained at the end of the day, who are the ones who've been there all day, because they've borne the burden of the heat of the day. And the heat of the day, even back then, was a tremendous burden for people out in the fields. Isaiah talks about sun-scorched land and the Lord strengthening us amidst that scorching sun. And in Isaiah, the scorching heat and sun will not strike them down. He who has compassion will lead them and will guide them to springs of water. And so there are a couple of things that sort of stand out in this. Heat was an issue, in that part of the world is definitely an issue. People are relying on God to help them out and take care of them. And there are a number of references about people working in the heat or being given relief in the heat, time off in the heat, because it was so hot. And sort of a guidance for us today to say, heat was a problem back 2,000 years ago and more, and people were dealing with it in a variety of ways. And we need to look at it in the same way, in a similar way today, that how do we exercise compassion? How do we rely upon God to help us in these times of tremendous heat? And so we look at that and say, heat the problems with heat go back a long time, and there are references to it that will inspire us even today. Now, in these climate conversations, what we're really trying to do also, looking at it in creation care and saying, there's a theological basis for what we're talking about on any of the practical things that we're looking at today. And this really is a chance to look at practically in our lives today, what can we do in a climate-friendly way about the challenges we face? And so I looked at it in terms of our personal lives, what we can do. Some very simple things that can help reduce the impact of heat in our lives. So close the blinds, cover the windows to minimize exposure to sunlight. We do that, and we close the blinds later in the day. Sort of let the cool air in the morning and then close the blinds because the rooms get hotter and hotter if there's more exposure to sunlight. There's also a solar film that you can put on the windows that deflects some of the heat that comes in from the sunshine. Another option is using fans. Now, again, I spent part of the year in Singapore, and it's relatively warm there. It's in the 80s, 90s most of the time, and I use fans. And people here can use fans. So the thought, air conditioning sales have gone up massively in Seattle, but fans are an alternative to that. And we can look at that and say, it uses less energy than air conditioning. Even if you're using a heat pump, it's still going to use less energy. And it creates the breezes that are cooling for you and can be beneficial. If it is hot, you can avoid generating heat, because things like ovens or dryers or irons or blow dryers are all going to add heat. And you say, okay, I'm only going to use this for 5 or 10 minutes. Well, those little bits of heat all through the house add up cumulatively and make your house warmer. And that can create stress. It can create challenges for you. Avoid dark fabrics for curtains, clothing, or upholstery, because they can absorb heat. I was wearing a dark shirt at a reception on Tuesday, and people said, "Oh no!" And so, like, why are you wearing dark clothes on a day when it's 90+ degrees? And maybe not too smart, but using light colors can also keep you from getting too warm. And even just turning off lights. LED is not so bad, but depending on what lights you're using, turning them off can also reduce the heat somewhat inside your house. And I was looking for ideas of what do we do about heat, and there's some really creative ideas around. Now it's important to have enough water. Part of it's drinking water, but there's also a way to have more water by eating fruit. Watermelons, what, 90% water, something like that. Cantaloupe, strawberries, oranges, lots of fruits, lots of vegetables, have lots of water in them and can help you by having water that is going to reduce the impact of heat on you. Wear loose-fitting clothes that let air circulate. I think the New York Times had an article this week about what do you do. Loose-fitting clothes is one of the key things. And the concept is, you can wear short-sleeved shirts or wear shorts, but when the sun on a warm day hits your skin, it warms it up. And it's better to wear loose-fitting clothes that are very lightweight, even long sleeve on a hot day, can keep you in better shape. At night, take a cold shower before you go to bed. Avoid snacks because they warm your body. I learned something new as I was looking at this. And so you'll sleep better if it's a little bit, if you're cooler and more ready for the night. And heat can make us more irritable, angrier, stressed. So you sort of step back, take a deep breath, be patient. Now, I wanted to go through those solutions first, rather than starting with air conditioning, because air conditioning definitely reduces the temperatures. It also uses a lot of energy and creates greenhouse gases. But I did want to look at air conditioning, because it is becoming much more common in Seattle. Again, when I was growing up, couldn't imagine air conditioning. But now it's something that's becoming much, much more common. So air conditioning reduces the risk of heat-related deaths by about 75%. And even just spending a few hours in an air-conditioned space can help you if you go back to an unair-conditioned space by reducing your body temperature for a while, and you're able to tolerate the heat better. If you are in a house, you can put in air conditioning for the entire house, or put in a heat pump to which does hot and cold. But if you don't, if you're in an apartment or you're in a condo, there are portable air conditioning and air conditioners. On the right-hand side is one example in the photo. And so you can put that in, and it connects to your window, and it creates a cooler room, and it is fairly easy to do. So that's an option if you don't have central air conditioning and you're renting. You can put in a unit like that, work with your landlord, and put it in so you can keep cool. If you are in a house, the heat pumps actually dehumidify air better than air conditioning units. And there's less energy usage. So there's opportunities if you put in a heat pump, admittedly expensive up front, Good for the long term, not so good for the short term, but they do offer you the option of hot and cold, depending on the time of year. And if you have an air conditioner, whether it's a heat pump or just an air conditioning unit, if you service it regularly, it will be more efficient. If you change the filter, it will be more efficient. So it's taking care of the units so that they're in good working shape. The challenge is that air conditioning exacerbates climate change. So energy demand for space cooling has grown more than twice as fast as overall building energy demand. And buildings are responsible for, was it at least 20%, if I'm correct, of building energy demand and greenhouse gases globally. Air conditioning alone is 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and it's growing partly as populations grow more affluent. You know, they come from poverty in the less developed parts of the world to middle class or basic income. They're putting in air conditioning. Places like Seattle, which never used to need air conditioning, are putting in air conditioning. So the usage of air conditioning is growing. So that 4% is likely to grow, if anything. And for a population of 8 billion worldwide, there are 2 billion air conditioners that operate globally. The current, the cooling systems that are in place, have been in place, are relatively inefficient. The newer ones are more efficient. They're not perfect, but they're getting better. And so that low efficiency also creates very high energy usage. And overuse, if you're in air conditioning all the time, it's even harder when you need to go outside to deal with the heat. And so we become more dependent on air conditioning. And that air conditioning also releases gases such as the hydrofluorocarbons that can be far, far more potent in creating climate change than carbon dioxide. A couple of things you can do with air conditioning to make it more efficient. One is to set the temperature at 76 degrees. I looked at this about a year ago in the context of overall buildings. And researchers found that people are most comfortable when the temperature is about 76 degrees. The common thing is we've got to be 72 degrees and that's the right temperature. But the research they did showed that if the temperature is around 70 to 72, people have more illnesses, whether it's runny noses, sore throats, at the lower temperature. And when it gets up to 76 degrees, those symptoms disappear. People have symptoms when it gets below 76 degrees. And what's interesting also is that women and men are very different. And in offices especially, temperatures are often set for the men. What can we say? But women prefer temperatures and just whatever it is with body composition or whatever else, 3 to 5 degrees warmer than men is more comfortable for women. And so a lot of this is if your air conditioner is operating at 76 degrees or higher, rather than 72 degrees, you're going to be using less energy. So it's an opportunity to save some energy. So let me pause there. Some ideas for you anyway, and just ask thoughts, ideas, what you do, what works for you. Open to ideas.
I'll start by just saying my situation.
Sure.
I'm in a retirement community, and so basically a renter. And the last 2 years, I've had a portable air conditioner come in. It looked just like the one in that picture, except it's white and not black.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So I'm still kind of learning it because I don't have it all year round.
Ah.
It got reinstalled just before our heat wave. So
Perfect timing.
I've been so thankful. So I mean, so I was interested in the most comfortable temperature that you were talking about. When I really want to be cool, I set it at 76.6, but I can be comfortable when I set it higher than that.
Wonderful.
I'm just a little warmer, but that feels right. Why should I feel so cool when I'm in the middle of summer and it's so hot outside? And it feels more natural to set it at 77, no, more like 78. And sometimes I put it at 79.
Perfect.
However, I think I like it cooler at night. However, it's my living room and I've got, and my bedroom is right next to it. I do have a fan that I set that faces into the door. And I'm assuming that it's taking some of the cool air from the living room and sending it into the bedroom. Anyway,
Perfect.
so that's a starter for where I'm at.
Ruth, you're a perfect example. Thank you. Thor, any comments before you need to leave?
Sorry, I'm on the east side and in the shade of a lot of trees, so I don't need air conditioning.
Oh,
But the trees are drying out and it's looking more and more like a severe drought this year. Last year we came one step short of killing the trees. I don't know what to say anymore. It's becoming very hard to even live here.
It is very different than it used to be, put it mildly. Yeah.
or I didn't get to hear where you're from.
Oh, I live in on the Bothell Woodinville line, and the trees to the east of me turned gray last year. They're kind of a grayish brown, and they haven't fully recovered. And we're getting this. I study the global climate. We're getting all this polar air because the Pacific got warm, and so it means every year after this we're going to have the same drought from June, July through September, October. And that's not going to go well. I mean, my daughter's a biologist that works for the state, the Department of Natural Resources, and they talk about it becoming grasslands because we're beyond the adaptive range of most of the trees, but they don't discuss how that's going to happen.
Yeah.
I don't know. I could show you the I mean, I've got the climate site, Climate Reanalyzer from the University of Maine up, and I could show you where the polar air. I'll just put it in the chat.
Okay. Yeah, if you put in the chat, then Marjorie can send it out to everyone so they can take a look if they're interested. Or I can tell Marjorie's on vacation this summer, so I may send it out. We'll see. We'll get it out to people.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you.
I mean, Lahaina was a warning in Hawaii, and if things get too dry and it's windy, and I watch the trees blow outside your window, we get a little wind like that in August or September. It's not going to take much.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Fires in the summer look like they'll be a challenge as well. Yes.
Yeah. Take care.
Thanks for joining.
Yeah, I, like Ruth, appreciated your the marker about what temperature to aim for on the thermostat. We too, we at our house, which is an older house, about 100 years old, got a heat pump after the 2021 big heat bump. And and it works well. And you're providing that the 76 degrees marker makes me realize how much I'm conditioned by what it should be, where we should be setting it in the
Yeah.
winter or the warmer time. And so I did notice this week that I really didn't need it to be that cool. The house kind of cools differentially between the two floors just because of the way it's configured. And I really didn't need it to be that cool. So anyway, this gives me yet another reason to bump it up a little higher. So
Yeah,
thank you.
absolutely.
Sincerely,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah. And the reminder
Yeah.
about the filters. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one thing I've got to remember too, is change the filters, get it cleaned and make
Yeah.
sure it's efficient, and
Yeah.
those little changes make a difference. But yeah, it was really interesting to look at the research on temperatures in buildings. And the 72 versus, which were, like you said, you were conditioned to, that 72 is the perfect temperature. And
Right.
then I look at it, I've got friends who go to Hawaii or Phoenix or whatever during the winter, and it's not 72 degrees there during the day. It's, a little bit warmer.
Yeah.
And they're perfectly fine. And then at 76, something like that. And then again, the difference between men and women, I had no idea on that.
Mhm.
But there is a difference. Yeah.
Okay. That's helpful.
Yeah. Good.
I'll have to learn how to, I think I did check my filter once last year, but it's such a new thing that I haven't learned it again this year. I have my manual that I'm gradually looking at, but it's kind of like a new thing for me to be having air conditioning. Totally new thing. I've never
Yeah.
lived with air conditioning before.
You
Oh, I
didn't need it.
know. One thought I had too was I don't need to keep it going in the morning.
Right.
I can actually turn it off and open the windows because it's,
Yeah.
I mean, unless it hasn't cooled off, of course, but like I noticed this morning, it was plenty cool to have the windows open. So I didn't need to keep my air conditioning going during that time. Oh, I have a question. I also have this fan that rotates, it sits on the floor, a long, tall thing.
Yeah.
And I have it going in the room at the same time as the air conditioning. And then I move it for night when I want it to face in the bedroom. But I was wondering, does that help to move the cool air around? Or it's just, I don't know if I need it or I don't. I haven't really experimented.
Usually it'd be one or the other. That if you're using air conditioning, you probably don't really need the fan that much. Or if you're using the fan, you may not need the air conditioning.
Yeah, I think I could do more experimenting on that and just use
Yeah.
one or the
Yeah.
other.
And I'm with you. I make sure the windows are open first thing in the morning to let in the cool air, and then early afternoon close them up because the heat starts coming in, and so it's like 6 or 8 hours without anything at all. I mean, we don't use air conditioning, but it has sort of the natural cooling in there, and that's a benefit. Yeah.
And it's so refreshing to breathe real air when I
You're
outside.
right.
Oh,
Yes. Just open the windows. It works fine. Yeah.
so I noticed, Richard, you're in a different location. You are in Seattle now.
I am in Seattle at this point. Yes. Got back on the weekend
Just this weekend?
on Saturday.
Oh, wow. Welcome back.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Good to be here. And for someone from Singapore, it's been the right temperature. So everything. Let me see if I can figure out where we should be. There we go. One more before. Okay. So what I wanted to look at is sort of some broader solutions, which aren't necessarily, some of them are things that we can do, and some of them are more broadly the policy side. But then, let's look at it more broadly. So those are, what we talked about the first half was some of the things that we can do individually. But one of the things that we can do, even in our own yards, if we're in a house, and have a yard, is to plant trees. And the green spaces and the small parks also help reduce temperatures. There are green corridors created in Colombia. They reduce air temperatures. There's a group here called Groundswell, which makes small like parks all around the city. And there are others as well. There's sort of the mini parks for any area within Seattle that has a little bit of space. They'll go in and plant plants and plant trees. And that can create a significant improvement just through having more trees in more places. So it's something that we can do and something that we can participate in. And whether it's our own space or whether it's the city space, we can plant trees. For homes and buildings, there's solutions that are painting the roof light colors. You see that, I think, if you go to Spain or Italy or some of the other places, that you've got a lot more white on the roof. We're probably not going to do that in Seattle because the winter is quite different. But if you want to reflect the heat, it can be a reasonable solution. And actually, New York City has started doing the reflective paints since 2009, and it helps tremendously with the temperatures. So it'll drop the temperature by 2-3 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that. Same thing with lighter color paint on houses. Can leave the inside significantly cooler. In our house, it's a darker color. We didn't even think about the lighter colors being needed. But now it's sort of rethinking it and saying, well, is white going to be better than dark blue going forward? Because if we get the hotter summers, it would be beneficial. There's also the cross ventilation that comes in when buildings are designed. So that goes back a long, long time. And it's not something you can change now, but going forward is something that can be done. One of the other things to look at is just how do we improve our neighborhood? In a number of neighborhoods, there are people, especially seniors, but others as well, who don't really have the strong social ties. And so if it's warmer weather, friends and neighbors can keep track of each other. And just say hi once a day, a couple times a day, especially when it's warm, to look at signs of heat stroke, because a lot of times people who are getting heat stroke, who are too warm, don't realize it. And so if you see the signs of heat stroke and they're not quite as coherent, or they're not moving around as much, or have other symptoms, and there's a link in here to where some of the symptoms are, you can actually save lives. And that's creating the community that is helping out each other. It could be phone calls as well. So, if it's not someone right next door to you or on the same street, you may have 2 or 3 people that you just call and make sure they're okay when the temperatures are as warm as they do now, and can literally save lives. There are a number of things Seattle is doing. So, for people who don't have access to air conditioning, there are community centers and libraries that open up. And so you can spend your day in the library and some of the community centers, and they're publicized that there are places you can go to. Health One provides water and drinks and information. One I hadn't really realized is that Seattle Department of Transportation, SDOT, sprays cool water on some of the bridges, because when it's hot, they expand and they can get stuck. I like the Ballard Bridge because it's near us, but other bridges around the city have the same issue of, if they're going to be raising to let the ships through and then going back down, they can get stuck on warm days. So they need to be sprayed with cool water. Seattle is also improving the tree canopy. They're giving away free trees. So if you have space for trees between July 1st and 31st, you can apply for free trees. We got several of them last year, planted them, free trees in the yards. That's been wonderful. So Seattle's working on that. And then transitioning infrastructure away from fossil fuels. Bruce, the mayor was speaking today, and there's a program called BEPS, which is a building efficiency program. And it's has standards for building efficiency, more for office buildings. But Seattle is working on that in order to improve the infrastructure and reduce fossil fuel usage, and make the buildings more efficient on a broader basis. Systemically, there can be legal and regulatory changes that make a difference as well. One thing, and some of these are definitely difficult to get through, but one of them is mandating better air conditioner efficiency, because air conditioners are inefficient. Ruth, you mentioned you got a relatively new one, so it's probably more efficient. Well, some of the other ones just use a lot more electricity, which results in a lot more greenhouse gases. And so those mandates for sustainable cooling, especially as more cooling goes in around the US as temperatures rise, can be quite important. And then air conditioners that don't use the hydrofluorocarbons and other gases can be very important, because they're thousands of times more impactful than carbon dioxide. And then there are limits on outdoor work schedules. I think Washington State has some limits on that. A couple other states that we won't name in particular have eliminated those protections for workers. It's when it's 95, 100 degrees, 110 degrees, there need to be protections for workers. So we can look at it and say, how do we advocate for some of those changes, or what else needs to be done? And part of it is also the education or advocacy to make some of these improvements happen. I tend to be more on the education side. Kathy Minch tends to be more on the advocacy side. And so there are a variety of ways that we can take action to improve by educating people what they can do, educating legislators, or advocating for particular policies that are going to protect people from the heat going forward. So there can be a number of actions that we can take individually. There's also some really innovative technology that's coming through. I look at technology from a number of startups in particular. But there's a passive solar cooling. So in a number of areas, new buildings that are being built are using architectural design that maximize sunlight in the winter to keep the building warm, minimize it in the summer. And it can be some of the shades that you put in, it can be the types of windows you put in, it can be the top of the building and then what color it is. It can be the flow through in the building, air is flowing through. So a lot of things on the passive solar cooling. The air conditioning that works differently and does evaporative cooling with salty water. So it's a new way of doing some of the air conditioning and using different materials than what's done now. And in some cities, there is distributed district cooling. So there is essentially a shared air conditioning unit, the HVAC systems in buildings that will, because you're doing it centrally and with one larger machine rather than a whole lot of distributed machines, it reduces the amount of energy that is needed and reduces greenhouse gases. So again, Singapore is doing this. I think a couple of places in Europe are doing this, and it's the central cooling plant rather than individual air conditioning units. And for us as individuals, there's some really interesting technology that's available as well. Cool Life has fabrics that allow heat to flow away from the person. And so the different fabrics that are done, and there's some others as well that do something similar with the textiles and the fabrics and the design can reduce your body temperature. There are also smart mattresses with foam and grids and water that goes through. And so you can reduce the temperature at night rather than having air conditioning. You can use mattresses that have water flow through or different types of materials that are going to be reducing the temperature and making it more comfortable for you. There's a new ceiling fan from Nanyang Technological University in Singapore that cools the room faster, uses less energy, And so there's some ways with fans that you can look at and say, okay, if we're going to use fans part of the time or all of the time instead of air conditioning or in complementary to air conditioning, you can have more efficient fans. And then the vest on the right is from Techniche, and it fills up with water, the cooler water, and it can cool body temperatures by 25 degrees Fahrenheit. I mean, just absolutely amazes me. So on the hot days, it reduces the temperature around the body by that much. So you don't want your body temperature to go down too much, but there is particular clothing that is designed to reduce your body temperature. So these are some of the things sort of on the systematic basis with the distributed cooling, or the individual clothing that comes in, or mattresses or fans that we're able to use on an individual basis and make it cooler for ourselves. Really interesting to see. Thoughts, ideas, what you can do?
You mentioned something about what is it, distributive energy in different buildings. Horizon House, where I live, is in conversation with an organization called Creative Energy that is developing this program with Swedish. We're on First Hill, and there's Swedish hospital in all their facilities, and we're looking into at least being our own distributive energy as an individual complex, but also connecting in with Virginia Mason and Swedish. We're in this conversation about how we might be able to participate in this project with our environment committee here at.
Oh, you're fantastic.
Yeah.
I can send you some of the stuff that I found on it if that's of interest to you or the committee. Part of it is, with my interest in Singapore, I've looked at what's happening there, and there's some areas of the city that have done the distributed district cooling. And then a couple other example of it, which is what you're talking about with Swedish and Horizon House.
It'd be both. I mean, you use the heat, the excess heat from one, you use it as heat pumps to cool. I don't know. It's a pretty fascinating idea about how heat and cool are so interconnected with each other, and you can use. Anyway, it's.
Well, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So, Ruth, you're at the leading edge once again.
You shouldn't be surprised.
Well, I get to be in meetings. I'm in the subcommittee of the sustainability. I'm in the subcommittee called Sustainability Committee that gets to meet with our architects about all the plans and buildings we're doing, and how to, I get to hear about all that. I can't say I'm active. We have this wonderful chair of the environment committee who feels very comfortable going around at the city level and talking to them and getting grants and kinds of things. And he is so active that I don't mind being part of the committee because I don't have to organize it.
Right.
And you can learn so much.
Oh, it's fun. Yeah, I mean, I just feel like I'm in on this adventure. Well, and St. Mark's is moving right now. We're moving toward a capital campaign where we're going to do what we achieve 2030. I mean, achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. And we're going to be nice if we figured out how to educate the congregation about what it is that we're doing, and to inspire them to want to donate to the capital campaign that it's going to take. Yeah.
The example you gave, Ruth, of Horizon House, Virginia Mason, and Swedish potentially undertaking that kind of collaborative design is fascinating to me because, Richard, when you first described the generic idea of the distributed energy or whatever it's called, the picture in my mind was buildings side by side to minimize the space between them so that, because I was picturing, I don't know, air and water and whatever
Yeah,
else
yeah.
flowing back and forth. And so to think of the geography of Virginia Mason, Horizon House, and Swedish, even though they're, you could walk it easily, but they're not exactly side by side. And so
Nope.
that makes me think about the infrastructure impact to make those connections happen. And maybe I haven't gotten to that next step of we're not just talking about pipes underground, but
Well, I wonder, I think we are talking about
Yeah,
pipes
pipes underground.
underground.
yeah, so I'm saying,
And that totally scares me because that, we've had the streets so cut up anyway.
exactly, that's what I'm saying
We
is
have
what
to
kind of
open them
impact.
back up now yet again. I don't know. Anyway, I haven't gotten to that question yet, but
I think
The-
that you're right, Edie. It's sort of when it's in our own backyard, it becomes very tangible.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
just so exciting. Oh, the other thing I wanted to bring up is under advocacy.
Yeah,
We have a huge opportunity to make sure that everyone votes no for 2117, which is the repeal of if they approve it, it would repeal the Climate Commitment Act, which is terribly significant in terms of progress that
Hmm.
we desperately need to make, and it would spoil the good reputation and influence that the state of Washington has by having these progressive actions. It
Yeah.
seems very important for us to figure out how to make sure that everyone in the congregation knows about that and votes no.
Very significant. Yeah. Absolutely. Good. Well, thank you. Let me just pop up sort of the ending slides, and we'll close out fairly soon. Now I always I like to look at a couple quotes on it. And this isn't heat specific. But it's I just love the quotes about what's happening with climate change. And climate change is sometimes misunderstood as being about the weather. In reality, it's about changes in our very way of life. And I think this week we're seeing it. 2021 we saw it, that climate change is massively increasing heat. And we need cathedral thinking. I like that from Greta Thunberg. Lay the foundation, even if we can't figure out the ceiling yet. Look at what we're doing. So I love some of the quotes on there. So it's just sort of different ways of looking at it on the importance of what we're doing. Let me go ahead and close this with a prayer. Heavenly Father, we ask you to stir our hearts into action. As global temperatures increase, inspire us with the ways we can make a difference in our homes, church congregations, communities, and the world around us. We pray, Holy Spirit, that you will prompt us where we can do more to love our neighbor. Amen.
Amen.
Great.
Let me stop recording.